Hello and welcome to On the Record. I'm Shereen Bhan. My guest today is the CEO of a company that is the third largest pharma company in India. In fact, the stock has been an outperformer, up 8% year to date versus the pharma index, which is down 11% in the same period. The company has come a long way from the first big global breakthrough in 2001 when it introduced an HIV combination drug for less than $1 a day, a game-changing development for HIV therapy. And today, Cipla hopes to transform itself into a global healthcare organization with a sharp focus on strengthening its presence in the US market in the complex generics, peptides and respiratory segments. Well, to talk about the pipeline and Cipla's plans ahead, joining me now is Umang Vohra, the Global Managing Director and CEO. Umang, always a pleasure. Many thanks for joining me here on the record. Let me start by asking you about the growth aspiration, Umang. You say that you want to position Cipla as a global healthcare organization. You've identified certain engines of growth, whether it's the wellness-oriented business, it's betting on new therapies, it's a diagnostic business, and of course your continued leadership in the respiratory segment and a focus on the US market. Of these, take me through the key milestones that you hope to achieve in the next few years. What's the roadmap?
Thank you, Shereen, for having me. And it's a very comprehensive question. Let me attempt to answer it. I think broadly, the three or four drivers for us. The first is just in this healthcare diversification. We see a lot of markets like India, but that also means that India will get the largest amount of focus in terms of the market that we want to create here. And what we're seeing in India is incredible amounts of deepening of the healthcare market into tier 2 and 6 towns. We are seeing a wave towards wellness. And both of these are opportunities that we want to capitalize, not just for India, but also for the rest of the markets across the world. So that will be growth driver number one for us, which is just the deepening of the presence of healthcare in India and the evolving consumer healthcare space. I think in the US, which is a very large market for us, we continue to see the benefit of our respiratory pipeline and our peptide pipeline deepening there. This is part of our core business. But at the same time, we're also looking at new innovation and R&D that can perhaps take us into new areas like biosimilars, into areas like the mRNA and other areas and therapies, which frankly COVID brought to the fore more significantly than before. So that's the second area that we're looking at. The third area is a lot of the emerging markets where we think that we might be at an inflection point right now, considering where the world's been in the last 2 years. I think things are beginning to bottom out for a lot of these markets. They've all taken a deep hit, and we see early signs of revival. So all these three parts of the world, I think the two big engines that are running is of course going to be innovation. And maybe a large amount of deflation enablers such as digital in our business journey.
You know, I want to pick up on each of those, and let me start by addressing the wellness segment that you spoke of. And as you pointed out, you have aspirations of building that out even further. How much of that is going to be driven inorganically? Is that an active discussion that you're having with potential players at this point in time? And what would the size be of that business, and what kind of investments do you hope to make within that space?
So we have very large organic brands in the wellness space, and our objective would be to grow and deepen these organically first. Of course, inorganic is a part of the strategy. But I think if you look at just the depth of our organic brands, we have several brands which are 200 odd crores big. The total business right now is about 600 crores. We can see this business growing on the health side itself to close to about 2,500, 3,000 crores over the next 5 years. So we are very bullish about consumer wellness. I think this is a business that will require us to be a lot more D2C oriented as well, in addition to creating equity for these brands with doctors and with patients. So we have large number of brands in the pain space. We have a large franchise in the vitamin space. We are the leaders in the nicotine replacement therapy. And over a period of time, we will create more brands in the cough segment. We will create more brands in the mom and children segment. And I think we feel very bullish about this category in India.
Okay, and you continue to believe that you will be able to enter these new spaces that you spoke of within the wellness space, mom and children, for instance, organically or inorganically? What is going to drive the growth there from the 600 crores currently to about the 2,500, 3,000 crores that you aspire to over the next 5 years?
We think organically we can reach about 1,500 crores just out of the current portfolio that we have, or possibly even more than that. And the rest of it would come through new introductions in all these other segments that we spoke about. But also there would be an inorganic lift to this business too. We believe that out of the last 5 years or 7 years, we've demonstrated how to build bigger brands and how to experiment with these brands in different store formats, whether they're online or they're the offline grocer stores, offline chemist stores, as well as all the modern trade channels. So I think that's what's probably going to drive this. The doctor equity that Cipla has in the country allows us to brand our products and for them to be received appropriately by different audiences.
Let me then talk about the India story, because you said that you continue to believe that growth is going to come in from the non-metros, from the smaller towns as well. What is that going to mean, if you can quantify that for me? Today, the India opportunity for you is about 45% of sales, up 27% year on year. What's the 5-year roadmap as far as India is concerned?
Well, we think India can possibly double from where it is today. We have about a 10,000 crore business in India. We believe that that business has the potential to double in 5 years. And I think obviously it'll be augmented with an organic play, but also organic consumption, if I was to say that. But, you know, let's look at the demographic factors for India. We have so a couple of things have been enabled in the Indian context. The first is just the birth of insurance through Ayushman Bharat and several other schemes. And this creates affordability for a lot of procedures that used to sit outside of several families. So I think from a government side, this has been a very big boost. The second is just the deepening of hospitals. If you were to travel in the interiors of India about 5 or 7 years back, and you were to do the same trip today, you'd suddenly see a lot of hospitals, lots of clinics, lots of chemist stores coming up in these cities. And I think that's, you know, people don't need to travel necessarily to metros or tier 1 towns now to get treatment. They can hope to get it in the tier 2 towns and the tier 3 towns. So we see these as huge enablers of growth in this part of the country. So I think it's going to, for us, India is likely to be a market that doubles hopefully in 5 years, aided inorganically as well. And that's the opportunity for us. So we're 45% of the sale. We're hoping to keep the same percentage constant going forward as India begins to leap as much as some of the other markets that we are focused on.
What do you see as the big challenges and the big risks? You know, you talked about the growth opportunities in India, but let me ask you the reverse question as the big risks and the challenges. Of course, price control and the changes in the regulatory environment, whether it is with fixed dose combinations or other issues. What do you see as the big risks with respect to the India business?
I think the big risk with the India business is largely going to be the organization of trade. And of course, at any point in time, policies by the government which create a shift in the marketplace. So we can talk about both. I think the organization of trade in terms of what share of the business will be occupied by the big chains is definitely a big risk. Today, we think it's about 10%. We'd like to believe this could become 20 or 25% of the overall business in the next 5 years, leaving a fairly substantial portion of the business still with the current mom and pop chemist stores. But that's one big risk because it has a pricing connotation to it and a margin connotation to it. I think the other big risk that I see is obviously any policy from the government which could create upheavals for the industry and or make it difficult for certain sections of operations. So I think those would be the two things that we'd be watchful for.
Umang, I now want to focus on the US business because part of the plans to drive growth is going to be your renewed focus on the US market. Take me through what the target is, what the pipeline for launches looks like, what you hope to add by way of size over the next few years.
Our US business is about 500 million, and we are hoping that that business also could benefit significantly out of launches that are coming. We think that the launches of products that we've been public about in the asthma and the COPD space are significant opportunities for us and for our size in the US. We also look at the peptide trajectory of products that we've been able to partner, develop on our own, which is also very significant. Each of these products could be very, very meaningful, almost to the extent of 10-15% and upwards of our current base. So as we see a range of products which are there, I think this business could significantly increase from the current levels to the levels that we think in 5 years. We think even this business has the potential of doubling in size in the next 5 years or so.
But how challenging is the pricing environment? You know, your peers that I was speaking to said that, look, pricing pressure is the reality that you have to live with. You cannot ignore it. And it's only expected to perhaps worsen, given the administration's sort of very determined focus on ensuring that prices come down, which may not necessarily impact Indian pharma as much. But what's the pricing environment looking like at this point in time, and how much of a risk is that potentially going to be?
So the pricing environment in the US historically, if you were to go rewind back about 15 years, has always been the 0 to 5, 0 to 10% type of price erosion that happens every year. The market deflates. And I think what happens is the only way to offset that is through new product launches. I think it works for us a little differently than the others, Shereen, and the reason for that is that our business is a relatively lesser size. So if the business becomes a larger size, your innovation engine has to work that much harder to be able to get the same benefit in your top line to avoid what you're deflating through pricing. So I think we don't have the same problem over the next 3 to 4 years. We, of course, have to erode pricing every year because of the nature of the market, but we don't have that significant a challenge over the next 3 to 4 years. But if you're asking me 4 years and beyond, would our challenges be roughly the same as what the rest of the industry faces? Probably yes. And that's when the innovation engine will continue to have to fire at a different level, a different speed. And maybe there would be more types of products like biosimilars that would enter our portfolio at that point in time.
You know, since we're talking about the innovation cycle that you intend to focus on, and you just spoke about biosimilars, what about things like the potential tie-up with Moderna as far as the COVID vaccine was concerned? Take me through what the new bets are likely to be as you look at future-proofing Cipla.
I think we did have the discussions with Moderna, and unfortunately those can't go forward because of various factors that were involved at that point in time. But we're in active discussions, with several companies that have mRNA-based technologies, and the objective is not to get a vaccine for COVID or a vaccine for a specific product, but rather being able to bring that technology and research with it and then manufacture with it out of India. So that is what we're focused on. That's one area that we're looking at. The other area is areas of CAR-T, which are now becoming the preferred treatment for cancer and several other indications. And the objective is that we look at the presence of these technologies and the presence of the products that come from these technologies within India. We'd like to imagine our role as a role of an innovator. And I think that is the promise that we would like to make to India, and what we're trying to get to as a positioning for Cipla within the India market and some of the other emerging markets of the world.
Well, we'll take a break here on The Record. We're back with Umang Vohra, the Managing Director and Global CEO of Cipla, right after this. Welcome back. You're watching On The Record. I'm Shereen Bhan. We're in conversation with the Managing Director and Global CEO of Cipla, Umang Vohra. You know, given the focus that you just spoke of, especially as far as innovation is concerned, you said that you're speaking with the players to potentially bring mRNA technology to India. You're looking at the CAR-T opportunity as well. Any timelines by when you believe that this could start to have a meaningful impact as far as financials are concerned? And what kind of fresh investments are we expected to make in terms of betting on these new segments?
So we're looking at roughly 3 to 5 years as a minimum to have from concept to product. So we're looking at 3 to 5 years if we start today to when we could have a first product in India. And of course, for the regulated markets, it's going to be significantly beyond that. But our focus right now is all India for some of these products. And the type of investments would be, our assumptions say that it could be somewhere in the $50 to $100 million range in terms of non-capex investments. And if you were to add capex, maybe another $50, $70 million more. So completely within range of how we would look at our business and the investment cycle. It's not significantly beyond that.
Okay, so about 50 to 100 million non-capex, that's the kind of broad investment range that you're looking at. You brought up emerging markets as another engine of growth that you will focus on. What could the contribution be in terms of revenue over the next 3 to 5 years? What is it that you're working with in terms of the target?
So we've deep markets in South Africa. We've got good presence in some of the other markets of the emerging side of the world, but we're primarily looking at Brazil, we're looking at China, we're looking at South Africa. Within these set of markets, Australia, we call it an emerging market for us, but Australia is, hopefully will be a $100 million market for us pretty soon. We're looking at Brazil. China is a market that we believe the respiratory opportunity is fairly significant. I don't think we're going to do the China market as a market where we'd sell by ourselves, but through a partner. But we've identified these deep markets which hopefully have more stabler economies and less volatility. So it's going back in a sense to the entire classification of the same Brazil, South Africa, China. Deeper markets, larger number of people. Those are the markets that we are after. So I think the contribution from the emerging markets would stay. We're roughly about 30%, about 25% of our mix. That's probably going to stay at the same level of mix as we go forward. I think if it might dial down a bit because of the significant growth that we probably will see out of India and the US, but it's a very important third leg for us in our business strategy.
Since you're talking about building on a culture of innovation, which is going to be key to driving your business strategy, I also want to understand from you what changes you're making to ensure that the organization moves in that direction. Culturally, the changes that you're making to ensure that the business strategy is aligned with what's happening on the back end.
It's a great question. It's a great question, and we've been doing a lot of thinking about this. I think one of the first things we've realized is that our own culture and value statement has to have innovation as a central value. We have that, but what we don't have is we don't have what that innovation links back to. So what we've tried to look around, and we've come up with a terminology called pioneering, which is really about how we could take something that comes from Cipla beyond into the industry. And we said we have to pioneer a lot of these things, whether it's about bringing technologies into India and coming out with products, or even otherwise. So that's the first thing that we've done. We've started speaking about innovation internally significantly. We've also started talking about how we could continue to be pioneers for the industry, for the people going forward. So that's the first cultural change. The second is, we're trying to look at, we spend a lot more into innovation. We're beginning to have a relook at how we center around innovation. So for example, we're okay now to have decentralized teams sitting in the US, sitting in Europe, where we believe a significant innovation quotient exists, right? It's very difficult to build innovation ecosystems in a new place. So for example, for a lot of innovators who are based out of San Francisco, a lot of innovators who are based in Europe, it's very difficult to attract them to come and work in India. So what we're trying to do is to create a structure where they primarily exist in their countries, but and we perhaps open a few decentralized centers for innovation around the places that they live, and try and merge that back with our mother organization within India. So I think those are some of the things that we're looking at. The other thing is alliances. I think a lot of innovation happens outside a single lab. It happened outside this lab for a large number of pharmaceutical companies in the world as well, and it's the same for us. So the right alliances, the right structures, the right people in decentralized locations, culturally espousing certain values, all of that's coming together. It's not an easy fix. it's very different to innovate versus very different to be a generic company. And you can't begin to exclude either of the two. The generic company is what's going to pay for innovation for us. So, and the generic company's mentality is structured around cost and access. And the innovation mentality is really about being able to get products which are ahead of the curve, which has the patient at the center and the ability to satisfy the patient need. So there are two organizations, and we have to properly structure them, marry them in order to get the best outcome for the company.
No, I understand that, and it's interesting that you're talking about building alliances in order to be able to create these innovation ecosystems. But Umang, what is that going to mean in terms of spends? What is the current spend, and what do you anticipate the spend to be over the next few years as you enhance your focus on innovation?
We're currently about 6%, and I think that going forward, two things would happen. We'd obviously continue to be 6% of a certain base that hopefully would grow on the top line. But we are also thinking of increasing our innovation spends to close to 7 to 8%. And I don't think in the way we look at our business model today that we can ever be higher than 8%, considering the needs of our stakeholders and what we think we can productively spend on. So I do think innovation spends in the company will increase on the R&D side from 6% to closer to between 7 and 8. But we're also innovating on our business model. The whole digital wave is effectively trying to allow us to mitigate the increase of inflation in the economy. So digital is wonderful because on the business model side, it allows you to get into lots of adjacencies at much cheaper cost. So the cost of acquiring a customer or the cost of detailing to a doctor on a digital platform is almost 1/3 or 1/4 the cost that it would take for a usual platform. So I think we're trying to innovate across not just the labs, but also our business model through the digital engine.
Yeah, and I think that is a journey that many companies and corporations are on at this point in time. Umang, I want to understand from you, since you talked about focusing on growth largely organically, but you're also open to inorganic acquisitions. What could be the potential gaps that you hope that inorganic growth will plug?
So I'm not sure, Shereen, that we have a number that we have an internal set of numbers that we want to get to. But I don't think we look at where we want to get to be satisfied because we have an X amount coming through an acquisition. I don't think we've planned our business that way. But I would think that we would want at least 10 to 15% of our revenues, let's say over 5 years later, to be from sources which we have acquired in this 5-year period. So yes, it's not going to be significant, but at the same time, I do think those acquisitions will bring new capabilities. I do think those acquisitions will allow us to be deeper either in markets or in territories in India. And I do think those acquisitions will be consumer heavy, whether they're in diagnostics or they're even in consumer brands that go deeper in the countries that we operate in.
You talked about diagnostics, and this is getting to be a very, very interesting space. Lots of activity, lots of action, not just from the incumbents, but from plenty of startups who are looking at getting into this. Your peers exploring this opportunity as well, whether it's Lupin or Torrent. How big of an aspiration is the diagnostic business for you?
So, I think it's an extremely big enabler for our business in India and some of the emerging markets. And let me explain what our version of diagnostics is. We're not in the business of setting up diagnostic chains. We're not in the business of setting up diagnostic centers because we think that those are highly capital intensive and fast commoditizing markets. But we are in the business of providing or trying to create solutions for diagnosis in doctors' rooms and chambers, because that's where a large chunk of India, starting with the tier 1 to the tier 4 cities, goes to get diagnosed and treated. And what happens usually is in this patient journey is when they go to this doctor, they're then sent to another hospital or another lab or another place to get tested. And we think a lot of people drop off because of that. They either don't get tested or the cost that they spend in getting this test significantly increases. So our objective is to bring this diagnosis to the doctor's room in the doctor's chamber as phase 1. And as phase 2, it's really to take this entire thing to the patients directly. So which means if a patient can blow into a phone and gets an opinion of what their lung health looks like, or if a patient can look into the phone and gets a scan done which tells them what their blood pressure is and how it's behaved over the past week or so, I think that's the type of diagnosis that we are after, which brings it more centered to the people, either to the doctors or the patients themselves.
Okay, so not looking at foraying into the diagnostic chain or diagnostic center business. Umang, I kind of have an inkling of what your response to this question is going to be, but I'm going to ask it nevertheless because this keeps coming around. The possibility of Cipla being put on the block, being up for sale. You know, the promoters have a little over 33% stake in the company. You know, it keeps coming back as a possibility and as a potential or an eventuality. Has there been any conversation with the promoters on this aspect?
No, none with the promoters, none with the board. In fact, we're at a stage where we want to be the consolidator. So there's been no conversation either with the promoters or with the board on this aspect at all.
Well, that's it then on the record with Umang Vohra. We are going to take a break here on CNBC TV 18 and be back with you in a moment with a lot more.